Now I'm going to show you how to use the very powerful 4-band fully parametric EQ in Cubase. And to do so, let's take a listen to this bass guitar group again. So I'm going to solo that group, then hit the Edit Channel Settings button to reveal the equalizer. And if you don't see the equalizer, make sure that you have its tab selected over here. In other words, if you're on the channel strip, you won't see the equalizer. So make sure that you're on the equalizer tab of this window. And then we've already talked about reading the frequency spectrum. Now let's talk about making some tone changes. So I'm just going to press play on my project and get some audio happening here. Now, the bass guitar already has a lot of low-end frequency in it, which is good because that's the job of a bass guitar, is to fill up that low end. But I want to bring out a little bit more of the definition of this instrument, and the definition is going to be in the harmonic content. So instead of adjusting the low frequency content, I'm going to come to the higher frequencies up here, and I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to make changes to the EQ, but the easiest way is to take this very center horizontal line here that's in a slightly brighter color of green, and click on it and drag a little donut on a rope up to increase frequencies in a specific range, or down to de-emphasize those same frequency ranges. So if I were to bring this range up and listen to the results, take a listen. So that's getting a little bit more of that bass definition, but I think it's at too high a frequency, so I'm going to bring the frequency down. In other words, I'm going to drag that little donut on a rope over to the left-hand side. Probably somewhere in between, and then I don't want to turn it up that much, so I'm going to bring it down. But that's a really good technique to use, is turning up a frequency range too high and then moving it around to hear the different frequencies. So I'm going to bring that down here a little bit, and then you'll notice that now that I've made an EQ change, there are actually two different lines on this frequency spectrum. There's a bright green line that shows us the current EQ, and then there's a slightly dimmer green line which shows us what the original EQ was looking like. So it gives you a comparison, it gives you a visual comparison of the two. Now, if I wanted to make this track sound a little bit more like a jazz bass, I'd want to scoop out some of the mid-range frequencies. So I'm going to click and drag another little donut down here. Now I've lost some of these frequencies, so I'm going to edit this EQ band, and you'll notice that above the little donut is the number 3. This is a 4-band fully parametric EQ, so there are 4 of these little donuts that you could drag around in this frequency spectrum window. So this is the 3rd equalizer, so I'm going to click and drag that little donut over here. Now I can listen to the before and after of the equalizer, so I'm going to hit the bypass button right here. And to my ear, I'm losing too many of those mid-range frequencies. I don't like it to sound that scooped. So I'm going to bring that back up a little bit, and then I can bring this down a little bit. And then I have 2 more equalizers that I can use, and I'm going to show you how to use them down here in the EQ controls. To activate that first low-frequency EQ band, I'm going to right or control-click and activate the EQ band. Now that knob for the gain control of that band is green, and you'll notice that it has added that little donut to our rope. Now I can click and drag that EQ gain up, or bring it down to lower it. And then if I wanted to narrow the frequency Q factor, which is how wide or how narrow one of the bands is, let's come over to the 3rd EQ and adjust the Q factor. So larger amounts of Q are going to narrow that band. See how that's getting thinner and thinner? Whereas lower Q settings are going to widen out that frequency range. So that's how you control how much bandwidth each of those EQ bands has. And then finally there's the frequency. The frequency control is the same as dragging that donut to the left or to the right. So that's how you can adjust the EQ with the knobs down here. There's a couple other things I want to show you quickly. You can also see a larger representation of the frequency spectrum by hitting this little button. And if you don't like the knobs and you prefer sliders for the EQ control, you can click that button again, and now you have the exact same controls, except that you have horizontal faders to slide to the left and to the right. So that's just another way to adjust the EQ. But since I'm kind of an old-timer, I like the knobs because they remind me of sitting in front of a mixing console. And then you also have a little preset button right here. So this is very similar to using a track preset, except that these presets are only EQ presets. So there's a lot of different EQ settings for lots of different instruments that you can try and see how they sound on your particular tracks. But now let's put this equalizer to use with the guitars and the keyboards, because as you'll remember, they were fighting a little bit. So what I want to do is bring some of the guitar frequencies up or down and see if I can fill those ranges with the keyboard EQ. So let's take a listen to the guitars right now. And guitars are mostly mid-range frequencies. So what I want to do is I want to bring up some of the high frequency content. And then I want to dish out some of those absolutely center frequencies, so right here in the middle. And that will help the keyboards sit in this frequency range. So when I go to the keyboard EQ, I'm going to be looking specifically at this frequency range to see if I can boost some frequencies here and therefore increase the loudness of the keyboards, not overall, but just in that particular frequency range. So let's close the guitar EQ and let's listen to the keyboard EQ and then hit the edit button. Let's bring up some of those mid-range frequencies. And then see how there isn't a lot of high-frequency content in these keyboards? I'm going to bring some of that up as well. But I'm going to want to do this on a fairly wide bandwidth. So I'm going to come down to my Q factor right here and widen that Q factor out quite a bit. Oops, I just noticed that I actually have these EQ bands reversed. See how this is number 3 and this is number 2? So if I wanted to adjust the Q factor of EQ band number 2, I would come to this control and adjust the Q factor. There, and I may also want to drop some of the low frequency content out as well. And I can do that by coming down to the pre-controls. You'll notice that you have a low cut filter and a high cut filter. I'm going to roll the piano's low frequencies off here a bit, because I don't want those to compete with the bass track. So now let's listen to the before and the after. I'm going to come to the bypass button here and hit before and after. So this is after. So now that I've got that EQ'd, let's take a listen to the keyboards and the guitars at the same time and see if they are easier to tell apart now, because we've used that EQ to focus the frequency ranges of those instruments to more complementary positions, so they're not competing with one another. Let's see if we actually accomplished that. So I'm going to solo the guitar group. Let me go to a different location where the guitar solo isn't happening. See, now we can really hear the guitars and the keyboards simultaneously, and let's hear it in the mix. So I'm going to unsolo the guitars and the keyboards. I really like what that EQ has done. It's really helped to focus in those frequencies of the guitar and keyboards so that they are complementary to one another and not being obtrusive or walking over each other. And very last, I'm going to show you how to adjust the EQ in the rack. See, if you click on the EQ rack, then you actually have all of the same controls here in the mix console, which makes it very easy to go through and make adjustments to the EQ without having to go to different edit windows. So if you wanted to even change any of the EQ, you can just click on that frequency spectrum window, and look, you get a nice big frequency spectrum window, which makes it very easy to make adjustments to any of the EQs you've already made. So that's another great way to adjust the EQ. Let's listen to the EQ quickly before and after. I'm going to solo both of those channels and then take a listen to both of them right about at this point in the song. And let's turn off the EQ. See how it's hard to find both of them? With the EQ on, it's much easier to find both of them when they're both playing. So that's how you use the Cubase EQ to bring focus and definition to different tracks and channels of your Cubase project.